Hallo, ek is Etie. Welkom by my kanaal waar ons als saam doen. Get your food, get your drink, prepare yourself for the ultimate Afrikaans conditional sentence video. In this video, I teach you how to create 0, first, second, and third conditional sentences in Afrikaans using the word as. As is the Afrikaans word for the English if. As follows the same conditional sentence rule that applies to all of the words in this speech bubble. You can learn more about the part 1 and part 2 adjustments for this group in my previous conjunction videos like the voordat and nadat video. But just for the sake of clarity, I will briefly go over the rule again. The rule for this group states that in part 1 of a conditional sentence, the word order remains that of stompie. So the verbs, specifically, the verbs are in the same places. But then after the conjunction in part 2, when the conjunction is now in the middle of the sentence, the verb order changes in that the verbs move to the back of the sentence. So that's basically what the rule states. And obviously when the sentence starts with part 2, when the conjunction is at the beginning of the sentence, that still applies. Part 2 is just then in front, but part 2's verb you'll find just before the comma if part 2 is in front and the sentence starts with the conjunction. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what the rule states. In the example, we have 2 sentences. The first is dit reën, which means it rains. And then the second example, ek bly binne, which means I stay inside. And then if you add those together, you get ek bly binne as dit reën. And then the other way around, as dit reën, bly ek binne. And you can see in part 2 where the verb is. In that first sentence, in part 2, the verb is at the end. Now, it's a very short sentence. And so it's not that clear that anything has changed because it's such a short sentence. But you'll see in the rest of the video how the verb moves to the back in part 2. We start off with factual conditionals, otherwise known as zero conditionals. Now there is a longish definition top right, but in short, these conditionals are based on facts. And both the condition and the result will be in present tense. So it'll be, if this happens, then that happens. Both present tense and present tense. Pretty straightforward. As jy ys verhit, smell dit. If you heat ice, it melts. Both present tense. And then the other way around, ys melt as jy dit verhit. Ice melts if you heat it. As my ma kook, was my pa die skorrel goed. If my mom cooks, my dad washes the dishes. As die hond gelukkig is, swaai hy sy stert. If the dog is happy, it wags its tail. And then the other way around, die hond swaai sy stert as hy gelukkig is. The dog wags its tail if it is happy. Some more examples. And we also look at how to negate a conditional. So, in other words, how to state the negative. As dit reën, word die grond nat. If it rains, the ground gets wet. Die grond word nat as dit reën. The ground get wet. Oh my word. And we stumble. I use this next sentence example to show you how things change when the conjunction is in the middle as opposed to in the beginning of the sentence, and how that will affect the negation. Because when you get to first, second, and third conditionals in Afrikaans, sometimes one of the parts only have one negative as opposed to double negative. And sometimes both parts have a double negative when you negate a statement. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. So let's take a look at specifically with factual or zero conditionals, how that works. In that sentence, as jy water verhit, kook dit. If you heat water, oh my word. And it's taking off. Now I'm just going to stumble over my words. If you heat water, it boils. In the next one, you take that same part 1 and part 2, but negate the sentence. So it becomes as jy nie. So after the subject, you find the first nie. As jy nie water verhit nie. Last nie before the comma. Now remember, when us is in the beginning of the sentence, it means part 2 is in the beginning of the sentence. And part 2 has a double negative. Just keep that in mind. And then after the comma, kook dit nie. There's only one negative. Both sides have been changed to a negative, but only part 2 has a double negative in this case of zero conditionals in Afrikaans. All right, so now we change it around and you have us in the middle of the sentence. We get water kook as jy dit verhit. Water boils if you heat it. Now we negate that one and it becomes water kook nie as jy dit nie verhit nie. Right? So the parts have now changed around. Part 1 still only has one negative, and part 2, it has two negatives. It's just that they are now on opposite ends than the previous example. So for factual conditionals, the double negative and the single negative is the same, right? Part 1, single negative. Part 2, double negative when you negate a sentence. So keep that in mind because it changes for some of the others. I have to point this out to you. In those two sentence examples, we have as jy water verhit, kook dit. You see that the word water is in part 2, which is now in the beginning of the sentence with the conjunction. Sorry, I am itching. And you have kook dit in part 1. Dit is in part 1. When you change those two parts around and part 1 is in the beginning and the conjunction is in the middle of the sentence, like that example that says water kook as jy dit verhit, you will see that water, when the us was in the beginning of the sentence, was in part 2. And when you changed it around, water did not travel to the other side of the conjunction with the rest of the words. Water swapped places with dit. It swapped sides with dit. Water is now in part 1 and it used to be in part 2. This is not the case for all of these sentences, right? So that's the other problem. They don't always swap positions or places. And you probably, strictly speaking, can say dit kook as jy water verhit, right? You can technically, grammatically do that. We do not speak that way. So when we change those two parts around and us is in the middle of the sentence, we will put water in part 1 and we'll move dit to part 2. It'll say water kook as jy dit verhit. It is a bit of a mind-boggling situation. It messes with the mind a bit because, again, this doesn't follow a specific rule. I don't think it's the case for all of the factual sentences, but in this one's case, that sounds better and we will speak that way. Future conditional, otherwise known as first conditional, is what we look at now. You'll see again there's a lengthy description top right, and we will take a look at that in just a moment. But before we get to that, I must first explain the terms in that little yellow word order example that I give you just below the first conditional. It says there, us plus present tense verb, and then there's a comma, sal plus base verb. So it means the if statement, if the if statement is in the beginning of the sentence, that is the tenses of the verbs. So you'll have us, that's now if part 2. You don't have to think in context of part 1 and part 2 for this. It's just if the if statement is in the beginning, right? So us in the beginning. Us plus present tense verb. So the first us, the if statement will be present tense, the verb. Then after the comma, you'll have the word sal. In Afrikaans, that is shall or will. And sal is already a future tense auxiliary verb. So it's the otherwise known as a helping verb. It's an auxiliary verb that indicates future. So just keep that in mind. And then it says plus base verb. I'm going to just explain to you what I mean by base verb before we move forward. Base verb is the word I prefer to use for what is otherwise known as an infinitive or an infinitive verb, which is the infinitive form of the verb, which is the most basic form of the verb. The reason why I don't like speaking about the infinitive is when I think of infinitive, I think of the whole thing that includes om te. And in English, that will be like to fly, to swim. In Afrikaans, that'll be om te vlieg, om te swem. And I give examples here. Om te skop, which means to kick. And then I circled in red the skop part. That is the base verb. When I refer to base verb, it's just the verb part in the infinitive without the stuff in front of it, right? So basically in the infinitive, but just I don't like speaking of it that way, just because I keep on thinking about omte before it. So that's all it's basically the present tense verb. The most simple present tense really is what it comes down to. And then we have the next one, om te praat. And again, praat will be the base verb or the one you'll use in the sentence. And that is to speak and or to talk. And then we have om te luister, which means to listen. So if you see the word base verb, it is the infinitive, but just the verb word, not the om te or the to in front of it. Back to the future conditional and examples. So basically a future conditional it means that whatever the thing is not true yet in the present, but it might become true in the future tense. So you'll have the if statement with a present tense verb, and then you'll have the second part with a future statement. It includes the infinitive or the base verb, but the word sal is the indication of future. That's very important. So sal must be there in the part after the comma. If you look at the examples, as jy hard werk, sal jy slaag. If you work hard, you will succeed. Jy sal slaag as jy hard werk. So you can move that one the other way around and it's fine. You will succeed if you work hard. So that's pretty straightforward. As dit reën, sal ons binnenshuis bly. If it rains, we will stay indoors. Ons sal binnenshuis bly as dit reën. We will stay indoors if it rains. And then you see the negation of that at the bottom. As dit nie reën nie, sal ons nie binnenshuis bly nie. Right, so now, unlike the factual conditional, where you had only one nie in part one, here you have a double negative in both parts when the if statement is in the beginning. So when us and all of its things is in the beginning in part two, but it's at the beginning of the sentence, there's a double negative in part two in the if statement. And there is also a double negative in the part with sal, that's after the comma. And now follows the but. This is the but to the previous clip. When you change the two around and part one is in the beginning and the us conjunction is in the middle of the sentence, things change. So, in the example, as hy hard studeer, sal hy slaag. If he studies hard, he will pass. And in the next sentence with negation, as hy nie hard studeer nie, sal hy nie slaag nie. Right? Fine. That's simple. Two negatives on each side. And you'll see there where the negative is in the sentence, where you put that in, right? But then, when you change the sentence, and part one is now in the beginning and the conjunction is in the middle of the sentence, then it becomes, hy sal nie slaag as hy nie hard studeer nie. Now, part one only has one negative. So this you'll have to learn, because they are temperamental. And it's just not, like I said, not a one-size-fits-all. So in this case of first conditionals or future conditionals, this is what happens. If the if statement is in the beginning, you have 4 negatives in that conditional sentence. If, however, the if or the as is in the middle of the sentence, you only have 3 negatives, with part 1 only having 1 and part 2 having 2. So that's important, and I know this is a lot of information, but that's important to remember. Then we have, as sy klaar, sorry, as sy haar werk klaar maak, sal sy na die partytjie gaan. If she finishes her work, she will go to the party. And then we have the negative, as sy nie haar werk klaar maak nie, sal sy nie na die partytjie gaan nie. And it is such a long sentence. If she does not finish her work, she will not go to the party. So in Afrikaans, it's like labor. It's such a task to get the whole sentence out because of all the nies. But then when the two parts swap around and the as is in the middle of the sentence, it becomes, sy sal nie na die partytjie gaan as sy nie haar werk klaar maak nie. So again, the first part now only has 1 negative. So you might be wondering why I look different all of a sudden. It is because I wasn't happy with my previous recording of the second and third conditionals, and so I decided to re-record this morning before I go to training. So good morning, here we are. Right, so we are looking now at the past conditional, and also known as the second conditional. And what these are basically hypotheticals, and they use an auxiliary verb that is past tense after the comma, but you still have that base verb, which technically is a present tense word, coupled with the auxiliary past tense word. And it means that you have a hypothetical condition, hypothetical result that is not true, but can be true in the present and possibly in the future. However, the part after the comma is already stated as a past tense concept. We'll look at it now. It will make more sense shortly. Okay, so we have in yellow, as plus the past tense verb. That is the first part. It is part 2, but it is the if statement, right? So as plus a past tense verb, and then you have the comma, and then after the comma, instead of sal, which indicates future, you now have so, which indicates past tense. And then you couple so with the base verb. So the examples, as ek nie van beter geweet het nie, sou ek die leuen glo. If I didn't know better, I would believe the lie. As sy meer tyd gehad het, sou sy 2 koeke bak. If she had more time, she would bake 2 cakes. Sy sou 2 koeke bak as sy meer tyd gehad het. She would bake 2 cakes if she had more time. As sy hier was, sou sy ons help. If she was here, she would help us. Sy sou ons help as sy hier was. She would help us if she was here. As hulle 'n motor gehad het, sou hulle na die strand ry. If they had a car, they would drive to the beach. Hulle sou na die strand ry as hulle 'n motor gehad het. They would drive to the beach if they had a car. So I'm not going to show you the negation yet. I'll show you that after the third conditionals, because it's pretty much the same. It's very similar, the two, when you state the negative. All right, so let's look at the third conditionals. We get to the third conditionals. Now, I have coined them past conditionals for Afrikaans. That is not a legitimate thing in Afrikaans. That's made up by moi. All right, so other people in high up or whatever in the language world in Afrikaans might frown upon that. But it makes sense to me. The reason why I used past is just because Afrikaans have very simple tenses. We have past and present and future tense. In the English, you have all of these things. The one is the past perfect, then it's this, then it's future perfect, then it's that. They have all of these iterations of things that you use. And in Afrikaans, it's just like, is it in the past? Okay. Present, meh. Future, okay. That's it. Like, very simple. So you'll see how the Afrikaans differ in this third conditional so much from the English, and I gave the English translation as you would write the third conditionals in English. I did not translate them directly from Afrikaans, right? So I gave you how it would be if you'd write a third conditional in English. And then I gave you the Afrikaans as we would do it in Afrikaans. And these two cannot be directly translated because of the tenses that we don't have the structure that you have in English. So with all of that said, we're again looking at hypotheticals. And with the past conditionals or the third conditionals, these hypotheticals are something that connects to the past, right? So when you had second conditionals, it was a hypothetical thing that could potentially be true in the present and future. But with these, it's something that, hypothetically could have happened in the past. So it's just very much past. Everything is in the past. Still hypothetical. All right, so you look at the first part with the us. That is us plus a past tense verb, same as the second conditional. And then after the comma, you have so, also the same. But now the verb that you couple with the auxiliary verb so, that verb is also the Afrikaans past tense verb. So it's just past tense on the one side and also past tense after the comma. And I use the same sentences that I used for second conditional so you can see how it differs. So you can compare the two. As ek nie van beter geweet het nie, sou ek die leuen geglo het. And then you have the English. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed the lie. Then the next one, as sy meer tyd gehad het, sou sy 2 koeke gebak het. If she had had more time, that's past perfect, she would have baked 2 cakes. Sy sou 2 koeke gebak het, as sy meer tyd gehad het. She would have baked 2 cakes if she had had more time. As sy hier was, sou sy ons gehelp het. If she had been here, she would have helped us. And then sy sou ons gehelp het, as sy hier was. She would have helped us if she had been here. As hulle 'n motor gehad het, sou hulle na die strand gery het. If they had a car, they would have driven to the beach. Hulle sou na die strand gery het, as hulle 'n motor gehad het. They would have driven to the beach if they had had a car. And lastly, negating past. So I just used the examples from the previous clip, and I'm just going to show you how to write the negative of those examples. It's a lot the same for the second and third conditionals. The only thing that will differ is that in the third conditional, you now have an Afrikaans past tense verb coupled with that auxiliary verb after the comma, and because of it, it might affect where you place like the second negative, possibly. Also, not always. It's going to depend on the sentence. I would suggest just read it as much as you can and see if you can find similar examples if you are not sure about where to place the negative. As ek van beter geweet het, sou ek nie die leuen geglo het nie. So all that happened was the first part had double negatives in it, in the positive statement, and you just remove those, and now you add the negatives to the part that didn't have them. As sy nie meer tyd gehad het nie, sou sy nie 2 koeke gebak het nie. And the last one, this is just the other way around. Sy sou nie 2 koeke gebak het. And see, this one also does not have that double negative when part 1 is in the beginning. Sy sou nie 2 koeke gebak het as sy nie meer tyd gehad het nie. Okay, so that's it. I really hope that the second recording is the good one and that it made sense to you guys. Oh, that was a mouthful. Even I'm still reeling. I'm like, what did I say? Did I express myself correctly? Did this make sense? Please let me know in the comment section. Also, if you need me to make videos separating the conditionals, like a video about zero conditionals, a video about first conditionals, and so on and so on. If you want me to make more of these, but now just take them apart and only focus on one conditional group and maybe its negation with that one group, let me know in the comment section, please. If you have any questions, also let me know. If I mess something up, please feel free to let me know. That's fine. I also learn in the process. As you learn, I learn. I've learned a lot in the time that I've had this channel. Really learned a lot. So, yeah, I hope this helps you guys. I hope you've learned quite a bit. You guys must have an awesome day. I'll see you in the next video.